Thank you. And we're ready to begin. Here we are beginning as we speak it. So I have Dr. Robbins was able to find some of those pieces of the model. I don't know where they were. I mean, but I asked him about it last week and then I was gone, but he was able to do it. Which brings us kind of really to understanding everything about, to me, it's not only is the structural unit, but it's more or less the functional unit. Because when you're talking about long bone, you're really talking about the strength of the structure. And certainly the reservoir that it is for calcium salts, particularly. It's called the osteon. Okay, that's this basically series that looks for all the world like tree rings, but certainly is not. But it's Haversham or Haversian, names that you can use for the system, to me are interchangeable. And it's really a very interesting elongated cylinder along the long axis. And there's so many of them. It's like if you went to Home Depot or Lowe's, and I don't know if they changed them, we used to call them dowels. And they were these circular pieces of wood that, I mean, individually you could flex a certain amount, but if you put them, you could put them together, put a couple of like rubber bands around them, piece of tape around them, and you really have a tremendous, you could still, they wouldn't flex nearly as much, but they'd be ridiculously strong. That's kind of what this is. So tiny weight bearing pillars that are cylindrical. And each one of those cylinders has basically rings of bone. And there's the tree ring analogy. It's got a central canal in the middle. That's for, again, for all about the blood supply. And that we call them layered bone or lamella or lamellae. There's another name for layers. That's all that is. So it's collagen fibers that run in different directions. So each ring that comes out, one goes clockwise, one goes counterclockwise. So every of these concentric rings, let's say the most interior one is clockwise, and it's counterclockwise, the next one's clockwise, etc. And oh boy, is that a great design to resist stress, twisting, and turning. And in between all of these collagen fibers, there are calcium binding proteins, and they attract calcium and hold on to it. And that's the design of this remarkable structure that is rigid yet can bend to a limited extent without necessarily breaking. That has tremendous, as you'll see in the way they describe it here. And to me, when you see an illustration that gives you a lot of information, that's my kind of illustration. Here's the central canal. As time goes forward, you'll see we refer to this in anatomy and physiology as the neurovascular bundle. Veins, arteries, and nerves often travel together. So when you're talking about where's the neurovascular bundle for this or for that, in this case, it's in that central canal of each of these lamellae. And here you can see, let's say this is going counterclockwise, this is going clockwise and counterclockwise, and it's a really neat system. And you can imagine the kind of torsion or twisting force that this can withstand. How many times have you caught your ankle and you're just amazed, I didn't break it, or it wasn't as bad as I thought? It's just remarkable. You'll find that, I mean, there's a fine line with, and this is a great day, anytime after a Sunday early in the season, to start talking about injuries, whether they're soft tissue or bone injuries. Like, so my son was complaining, even though Cincinnati won, they were in a suicide. He had two of his teams in the suicide pool with Cincinnati. I thought it was a lock. I don't like divisional games. And then Joe Burrow went out with a toe injury. What am I reading today? And he's injury prone. To be clear, that's what the problem. He has turf toe. Anybody know what turf toe is? We're going to look at the foot today. Effectively, when it doesn't matter, you're like this. He's planting his foot to throw, let's say, like this. Someone comes into it. It's the unique nature of that force. It's like you're pushing forward, they're going against you. Your toe is planted. Okay, and effectively the ground react. It was classically on astroturf. Ground reactive force is such that it pushes the toe as a unit up and either partially or completely dislocates it. Best example of that was it ended the career of first ballot Hall of Famer, played for the Steelers, his middle linebacker named Jack Lambert. Okay, turf toe. When they took off his shoe, okay, and I in our circle when we were here, we talked to a lot of people in the orthopedic circles, knew a lot of the orthopedic surgeons, and the circulated around whoever did it. And I don't know if it's still that Burke group that does them now, but whatever. I don't know if it's Chip Burke's group or not. His big toe was over on top of his second and third toes. Not broken so much, it was dislocated. Imagine that. I mean, it was just wild. And I mean, there was no way he was ever coming back from that. You can't push off anymore. Hopefully that's not the case with Joe Burrow, but you never can tell. That's why it's such a contact like that. That's part of the reasons, along with knee injuries, why they did away with AstroTurf. So that's the beauty of taking this course when we particularly get to the bone and joint unit, which is forthcoming now in the early fall, because it's injury 101 in football. How many high ankle sprains did the Steelers have yesterday? At least 2 on defense. When we do the joints, you'll learn what the difference between a high ankle sprain and a regular ankle sprain. So those canals, we call it the central canal, runs longitudinally, okay, has the blood vessels, the main neurovascular bundle, which branches off, again, that nutrient artery that you saw, and then going sideways, and these are perpendicular to, okay, called Volkmann's canals or perforating canals. Either of those terms is used at right angles to the central canal, pointing centrally. So if I'm in the middle, if I'm the central canal is centrally placed, the Volkmann's canals are pointing tangentially toward the center, which is going to distinguish them from the canaliculi, which are basically pointing almost in a circumferential area, not a tangential. So I use the terms appropriately in that regard. It's important for you to understand those as well. They connect blood vessels and nerves from the periosteum, the medullary cavity, and the central canal. So again, it underscores the elaborate nature of the circulation. Lacunae, if you want to believe that they're really cavities, go ahead, but the osteocytes are in there. And of course, if you remember going backwards, the osteocytes are surrounded by matrix and ground substance. And what happens is, effectively, it takes from the blast as the material, you end up with these tentacle, which is a very common thing we see, these tentacle-like projections. And it's almost like if the central canal is this way, pointing tangentially, are the Volkmann's or perforating canals, canaliculi are going side to side, and they're sending signals. Okay. Either sending chemical signals or electrical signals. They may be inducing it. We're getting a lot of stress here. We better make some more bone. Well, God, he's over the other side. Take a break. We don't have to repair so much bone. I like to give the cells need intensity too. I haven't gotten to the point of naming the cells, but I'm coming that way. I know. That would be in the line of another one of those stupid jokes you keep telling to your students. My wife says. I'm in such trouble when I get home. I think she had an implant done today at the dentist. She is hurting. And normally she loves the guy because he's about 35 and particularly handsome. Cougar. It's okay. I can take it. Nevertheless, God forbid, if she comes in here, I'm in such trouble. Osteoblast secrete. Finally, everybody's laughing together. What happened? We've connected. We're simpatico. You always have to have a barometer. You laugh too easily in the back, so you don't count. You need a barometer someplace. Somebody who doesn't ordinarily laugh every. That's a barometer. So, okay. So they secrete bone matrix, gap junctions, blah, blah, blah. Hardens, they're trapped. Yeah. Communication, yeah. Waste products, nutrients, whole deal. Okay, it's not done. You'll see the illustrations are better. There are additional lamellae that are not part of the system. They're called interstitial ones. Think of that as a similar material, not as well organized. That's sort of like a glue. Again, if you have these multiple dowels or pillars, you have spaces in between them. Okay, that's the interstitial one. Osteons that are remnants, and circumferential are around it. Rather than, there's no, we don't have an internal series of rubber bands. Okay, we end up with these circumferential lamellae. So they're underneath, they're deep to the periosteum, they're outside of the endosteum, they extend all the way around, and they help to resist twisting. So this is a really good illustration. Here's the actual microgram. So this is what it really looks like, as you can begin to see and hear the central canal, the tiny lacunae that are there. You get an idea of the layering. Here you can see a typical microscopic view where you can begin to see a real, the real central osteum, the central canal. The little hair-like fibers are going to be, if they're going this way, they're Volkmans or perforating. If they're going this way, they are canaliculi, better visualized here schematically. And now, so in between that area, here you have osteon, osteon, osteon. That would be the interstitial ones. These are circumferential ones. And you can see it's just like pulling it out. And you see a lot of illustrations in this particular text and PowerPoint series. You got to get used to kind of feeling your way around that. You're going to see when we look at muscle, it pulls out. When we look at it microscopically, we look at nerves. And a lot of things are layers, and you're going to see outer layers, middle layers, inner layers. So it's in anatomy, it's difficult, but it's almost like, again, you have to think very, very three-dimensionally. Spongy bone, opposite. Cortical bone, which all that was, highly organized. Spongy bone, not. But because of the way it's this degree of disorganization, you have all those neat little honeycomb of shelves, and they form along stress lines. So, I mean, it's a good analogy, like cables on a suspension bridge. Okay, and that's physics. We know who to ask about why that works. AB, ask Buxton. When in doubt. No osteons are present. Irregularly arranged lamella, osteocytes, blah, 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 blah. Well, again, more blood supply. And they showed you this before. Even though this is flat bone, and it would be better if they showed you the one from, which you can see it a little bit in the lab today with the bones out. A lot of those, the real bones, you're going to see the trabecular because they're beat up. You'll see that honeycomb pattern. And again, we use that a lot radiographically. In the days before, you could, we didn't have, scanning was in its infancy. You had x-rays. If you wanted to get some more information from x-ray, you inject a dye into something. You did an arthrogram or a myelogram. It didn't have the degree of sophistication. It was just in its infancy. So you had to learn how to interpret plain films, regular x-rays, and you looked at the trabecular patterns a lot to determine whether it was a stress fracture, a stress point, things that might have looked irregular in it. Maybe there was something in there that might have a more ominous suggestion of a tumor. Okay. So it's kind of a different world. So people don't think of it, but you get a lot. One of the neat things about doing that, and if you go into a clinical field, we have a tendency to overspend people's health insurance a lot. You do the $1 million workup for a cold. Not good business. I mean, sometimes, if it's a broken leg, it's a broken leg. You don't have to do 16 scans to see it's fractured tibia. It's fractured tibia. Where is it fractured? We'll put it back together. But I think that's something you're definitely going to see, because we're around here. They've been hashing out. If you didn't know, we're working on an old contract. So Dr. Robbins, Dr. Buxton, Dr. Hilwig are all very, very intimately involved with this. We're all in the negotiation. They finally have hammered it out. We self-insure. In other words, UPMC, where the insurance is through, they administer it. They tell us how much it should be worth if you had to have an appendectomy, or a hernia repair. They know about how much the doctor should charge, how much the hospital should charge. We're paying for it, and then the university's paying for it, and our adjusts accordingly, deductibles. When you get into that part of the world, it's very interesting. Nevertheless, made up of both, that's what I mean about overutilization. Organic and inorganic components, that's the mistake. To think in osteoporosis, you're just using minerals. No. Osteoid is the organic component that allows it to stretch. The inorganic components, strength, particularly. So these are more about compression. This is more about stretching, tension, torsion, twisting. In the right proportions, normal healthy bone, half as strong as steel femur. The femur up to 50%. You figure out when the steel breaks, the femur can take 50% steel, and as strong as steel from a twisting. That's because I identified them before, those things called sacrificial bonds. The bonds will break and quickly reform. That's the beauty of a lot of our bonds. They break, they can reform very quickly. They absorb a certain amount of tension. It's a two-edged sword. What brought to mind was ankle sprains. We used to say in the ER, we would rather have a simple fracture than a bad sprain. Like one of those high ankle sprains, I would much rather have a simple fracture. Simple fracture, 4 to 6 weeks, stick it in a cast, immobilize it, good to go. Those sprains, high ankle sprains, that could end, again, for Highsmith. I mean, he's a bit injury prone anyway. That 6 to 8 weeks is. If you have him back in 3 to 6 weeks, you got him very well. Because a lot of times those are surgical. So they have to put like a flexible thing around them. We'll kind of give you an idea what it looks like down the road when we talk about fractures. Give you an idea. This is where we've made some improvements, but it's sometimes the soft tissues are not near. They may be more forgiving, but then you're having to deal with swelling, with losing amount of strength. It's because they provide ligaments and muscles to support those joints, those bones. So the organic or the osteoid, 1/3, okay, of the bone is osteoid. 2/3 are the calcium salts. That's the heaviness of bone. The weight from the bone, calcium salts. Mostly calcium phosphate, some calcium carbonate. Ground substance and collagen fibers is the osteoid. Again, tensile strength, sacrificial bonds. Okay. And then once the trauma or the moment or the force dissipates, then they'll reform, which is very handy. What do they want? What do they want? 4 headaches. I keep getting these. Do you get them on your phone from from email addresses that come on your phone that I've never identified, having some kind of job? Oh my god, drive me crazy. You getting those? Boy, I keep deleting and reporting junk, but I keep getting the junk. I want to retire, not work. I should have an age program. So it's got a wonderful name, which you should be familiar with, called hydroxyapatite. That's how it's pronounced. Tiny calcium phosphate, hardness and resistance. That's why it lasts long after death, because of the minerals. And obviously we have a lot of information. This is going all the way back to our, Cro-Magnon and all those evolutionary ancestors. I don't know anything about it, but you have a lot of information, so you can, and then the carbon dating that will go along with it becomes in play. It's fascinating to see those things that are there, and I'm sure it's a very interesting science, considering the lifespan that we have now. From whatever it's in our diet, we're generally taller, we're more powerfully constructed in a lot of ways. They've determined from the bones. Interesting. I think a lot of that is dietary in nature. So we're done with that little background on the bone. So hydroxyapatite, calcium phosphate, some calcium carbonate, even some magnesium salts are in there. But it's a vast banking system for calcium. Part B. I don't spend a ton of time with this. This is really what we do. If we discover skeletal remains, we take x-rays. Hold on. Respond quickly when she is in pain. My mother didn't raise any foolish children. I have a sister. We're celebrating on October 9th. She'll be 80. I have a good picture of her. She's built entirely differently than I am. She is unbelievably tiny and petite. She weighs the same she did in college. 97 pounds. Can't fit into a size 2. It's awful. Did I tell you her husband? He's 82 years old. He shoots 80 in the golf course. He'd shoot his freaking age. It's not fair. Ossification, process of bone formation. So we can look at a skeleton when we cover skeletal remains and identify it, whether or not it's a child. Certain bones fuse at certain times. We don't no longer see the growth plates. When you get remains, skeletal remains, you can't tell whether there's still cartilage in there or not. Then you have to x-ray to find out. So it occurs until early childhood, remodeling and repair are lifelong. Everybody in this room, I would dare say, is probably bone mature by this time. The gals, typically 16 to 18. Guys have later growth spurts, typically during maybe the early college years, but not all the time. There's all sorts of variability. Some folks are done grow. I was just height in ninth or 10th grade. Stop growing. Okay. Go figure. So up to about 8 weeks, fibrous membranes and hyaline cartilage are replaced with bone. We call it endochondral or enchondral. Doesn't matter. I've seen them both. Ossification. Out of cartilage comes bone. Okay. So you replace hyaline cartilage. That's most of the skeleton. Effectively, all the extremities are like that, other than those areas where we see the flat or intramembranous bone, and you'll see these described. They come out of a fibrous membrane. What the signal is for your skull or your sternum to form, it's not abundantly clear how this comes about. Endochondral is a little bit better understood. All bones inferior to the base of the skull except the clavicles fall into this. So even the sternum, which I thought for at least some authors have told me that was flat bone that was intramembranous, but we'll go with it. I'm not going to ask you. Late in month 2 development, so we're starting to see, by the time an ultrasound is done during pregnancy, you get a pretty good idea of where these are developing. Previously formed cartilage requires the cartilage to break down, and basically, to sum it up, when blood invades cartilage, not only does it form the nutrient foramen, at that point in time, it begins to start the process of deterioration. And it's replaced by bone. Blood vessels infiltrate the outer lining, which was at that time the cartilage, which was called perichondrium, and it'll start to begin to change to periosteum and convert it. And those cells, those precursor cells, will now change from what were likely chondroblasts into osteoblasts. Again, there's a lot of fibroblasts, osteoblasts, and chondroblasts can easily sort of swap places. So what you will see what happens, the bone collar, which will form, and in diaphysis mean shaft, central cartilage calcifies, develops cavities, periosteum bloods invade the cavities, blah, 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 blood vessels, nerves, etc., etc. Pretty straightforward. That's read-to-you material. And then elongation. And then when we're going to focus on, it's not that initial process, because they show it to you fairly graphically, fairly easy to understand from the graphics that are there. But understanding growth plates. When we get to fractures, why I spend time at the structural weak point in a bone is the growth plate. Period. Most fractures in kids with growing bone catch there. Just like we'll learn when we look at muscle and tendon relationships, the structural weak point, where we hear about a torn Achilles tendon, quadriceps tendon, all of which we heard about in the last couple of weeks in football, it's the myotendinous junction. So anatomical structures have weak points, and we're very, very aware of them. What happens is that cartilage is only in what we call the epiphyseal plate or the growth plate. Again, the diaphysis is the shaft. The ends are called epiphyses. Epiphysis being the singular. To the primary center where blood first invades. As it invades, we begin to see the cartilage deteriorate, effectively starting to form the marrow cavity, and you're going to see that trabecular or cancellous bone around it. Here you can see the invasion. That's there. I mean, you have that primary collar. It's not a big deal, but I really, where the process really gets underway is with the invasion here. And now you can see it more extensive. And once that forms, the primary ossification center in the shaft, now we see a totally separate blood supply in each epiphysis, forming what we call secondary ossification centers. And they play a really important role because the shapes of those areas are how bones are able to move. They're there. And now you can see something, the epiphyses ossify here and here with cancellous bone or spongy bone. The hyaline cartilage remains only in the epiphyseal plate. And really what's left here, the articular cartilage. So eventually all of the cartilage will be gone except for the ends of the bone where it moves or where it contacts on the bone. And most of the time that's the area where there's at least some degree of motion. So intramembranous odd, formed by mesenchymal cells in there. These are the skull bones, frontal parietal, occipital temporal, clavicle bones, okay. Most commonly fractured bone in the body, clavicle. What game was that in? The guy went down. I don't know, it was a Monday night game. The guy went down, broke his collarbone right away. So here's what happens. The ossification centers formed and become osteoblasts in there. Osteoids secreted, fine, woven bone, trabeculi, nobody cares. Not important. Well, I don't really get excited about intramembranous bone. Whenever I look at it, I should learn just to skip it. Effectively, this is what happens. So what you're left with is really the important part. Without going through all the steps, you have an abundance of spongy bone surrounded by a certain amount of compact or cortical bone. So it's really a sandwich, for lack of a better way, of cortical bone, relatively thin, but thick enough, certainly like in a skull, to provide protection against trauma with a lot of spongy bone. And so again, in terms like you saw before, interstitial elongation, appositional thickness or shaping. And again, bone will shape. So bones stop growing during adolescence by and large. Facial bones will change. So we've all noticed in certain individuals in our orbit, facial changes, maybe thickening about certain bones, maybe more prominence. I mean, it's not a hard and steady rule, but you will see some changes with that. It's hard because if you knew somebody, I'm not recommending you do this because it ages you. When you go to like a high school reunion and you haven't seen somebody in 40 or 50 years, it's kind of like, some people you know right away. You swear some people didn't change at all. Some of them, I said to my wife, we were there for the 40th, and we went back, we were staying in the same hotel we had the party. Got to the room, I said, boy, they look old. She goes, did you happen to look in the mirror recently? That's the kind of love and affection I get. So here's the big piece for today. You have to have cartilage. The epiphyseal plate stays the same in thickness, the growth plate. Okay, the rate of cartilage growth on one side is balanced by bone replacement on the other side. So the area of cartilage on the epiphyseal side, okay, of the epiphyseal plate is relatively inactive. So when we draw these things out, as you will see, this is one thing. I did just the way they would do it. If the plate is here, here's this is here, and here's another plate there. This side, relatively inactive, elongation from that side, we call it diaphyseal. Here would be like the nutrient for anything, marrow. So what we're going to see is it's really the changes that I'm going to describe. The cartilage growing, beginning to thicken, eventually dying and calcifying, being replaced by bone is happening this way. So effectively, the epiphyses are getting pushed farther away. There's no activity, but by layering more bone here, we're pushing the epiphyses. That's processing elongation. They're moving farther away from the central portion of the shaft in all of the long bones. So the area, the so-called quiet or quiescent zone, is the area of cartilage on the epiphyseal side of the plate, inactive, relatively speaking. At that point, there are four zones. Where we see epiphyseal plate fractures, okay, not only the epiphyseal plate, but specifically when we see this area of calcifying, once the cartilage is starting to calcify, it's dying. That's typically, if you might, and research has done this when you're doing papers on this, like in medical school or orthopedic journals, you're saying, we sectioned out fractures and took a look at them and consistently found typically the zone of calcification. So what's happening is the cartilage is being pushed, let's say, closer to blood supply. And again, blood erodes or damages cartilage. So the area of cartilage on the diaphyseal side of the epiphyseal plate still rapidly divided. Growing bone. New cell form move upward, pushing the epiphyses away from the diaphysis, causing it to lengthen. The area where those new cells are forming, they're getting pushed toward the ends. The cells that are older, okay, are beginning to thicken. The lacunae enlarge and erode space. Because they're beginning to weaken in age, they begin to calcify. Chondrocytes die and deteriorate. That's why it's weak. Because part of that basically accounts for its strength. And then it begins to change into bone. Chondrocyte deterioration, spicules of calcified cartilage. At that junction, spicules are eroded by osteoclasts, blah, 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 blah. Spongy bone enlarges, remodels, etc. So it's not like sharp little points of bone. Everything eventually remodels. Beautiful process. We had to know all of the, know nuggets about all the layers, where they were, where the growth plates were, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. So this is a good, here's the schematic, here's the radiographic. They're taking a section here, okay? So this, why do I know this is not a fracture? This is, as you will see, this is femur, distal femur, proximal tibia. This is fibula. So you're taking a section from here, this x-ray. When you see a somewhat, why is that not a fracture? It's very uniform in appearance. It looks the same on one side as the other side. Fractures look irregular. Now, could you have, you're going to see there's a type of, and I'll go over fracture classification that you won't have to know. There's a fracture classification that's been around for probably since World War II, about 80 years. That all, if you're in orthopedics, you learn. Because that's how you categorize growth plate fractures. Just letting you know. If somebody may go into an orthopedic field, or you got a kid, okay, and they look at you and go, boy, that ball game, your son or daughter really got hurt. They have a type 3 Salter fracture. That's not good. 1 and 2 heal great. Type 3 problems. Because remember, it's growing bone, and sometimes when you fracture through the growth plate, particularly into the epiphyses, like here, you can cause the growth plate to stop growing. And then it becomes irregular. And I mean, I never did one of those cases. I've seen a whole lot of them, conferences and discussed. Here are the zones again. Here's the bone tissue, stains differently. So this is, you can see the cartilage pretty much consistently, the lacuna are very organized. They're much more abundant than in bone. Here you can see them hypertrophy or enlarging. This is getting pushed away, pushed upward toward that resting zone, deteriorates, replaced by bone. Giving you the same idea here. So classically, we had to look at these zones. So we numbered, resting was 1, by the way. And that was 2, 3, 4, and 5 the way it used to be in the textbook we used. So growth and length of long bones, as we go to adolescence, that begins to slow down. The plate thins and then eventually closes, being replaced by bone. And see, here's the difference. In cows, 16 to 18, in guys, 21, 22. But you typically do not see growth changes. As we age, we may see a certain amount of widening of the bone. Sometimes, like in feet, sometimes that's mistaken because they lose. It's what's holding the arch up. And it begins to show you, oh, my feet got wider and longer. I got to get different shoe size. It didn't change so much as the foot changed, not so much elongation. So we begin to see subtle changes, sometimes associated with weight bearing if you want to be really clinical. But I mean, boys can get big growth spurts. Big growth spurts. You would surely, there's somebody you know who overshot up 4 or 5 inches since you knew him as a freshman here in college. Okay? Yes, no? Probably do. I didn't have that luxury. I have 2 nephews like that. My boys, again, no genetic ties whatsoever. I don't see a lot of change, maybe an inch or 2. My son in college, they're both taller than I am. I think because I'm shrinking. So thickness widens as they lengthen through appositional growth. Okay, that's the shaping. It's all constantly shaping. Any type of stress, whether you're gaining weight, losing weight, unable to be active, decide to be active, all of those things. Osteoblasts continually are remodeling. As I said, your bones that you have right now, you did not have those when you started. They're all different. So constantly remodeling, osteoblasts, building bone, osteoclasts, removing bone, usually more building up than breaking down, which leads to thicker, stronger bone that is not too heavy. So there's a lot of ways that we do it. So it's a really wonderful system. And they're just beginning to show you, so I don't get a lot out of this illustration, but what they're showing, here's the original way it looked like. And now during the elongation, you can see how they've taken away things. So in general, when you start to look at regular x-rays, you'll see the thick side of the cortex. That's where the weight bearing is. So when we look at the femur, if you take an x-ray of a femur, where the head of the femur is, the medial aspect, that's where our weight goes into. Most of the weight is borne on the medial or interior aspect of your thigh or of your femur. In the exterior, not so much. So what happens, it thickens in those areas and it bends in the other areas, so to speak. So it's really interesting that sometimes the fact that it's thickening in those areas can lead to weakness. It becomes so thick that a tiny crack. And again, usually that's associated with osteoporosis. Again, when we talk about hip fractures, as I said before, it's not, that's when I was a kid. I remember one of our neighbors, I knew for a long time, he fell and broke his hip. He had a bunch of change in his pocket. Parents are like that with little kids. One, they probably don't know. And two, they're trying to make, say something to you. In reality, as time goes on, you begin to learn about those things. So, growth hormone. Most important hormone in stimulating the epiphyseal plate, infancy and childhood. Releases of that are growth spurts. If you are a parent or you ask a parent, watch out when kids start to eat more than usual. Going to shoot up. Just the way it is. Growth hormone is clearly the influencing factor. Growth hormone is when we get to endocrine, but that's more physiology. In adults, when we have an excessive amount of growth hormone, the bone isn't going to elongate anymore. The growth plates are closed. So all it does is widen, and it causes significant problems. So it's difference whether it's something that happens when the growth plates are open or after they close. And they're very, very interesting conditions, things like giantism and dwarfism, which I don't even think is a politically correct term anymore. Dwarfism? Can't say that, can you? I did, I apologize. Midgets? No, I can't say that. Munchkin? Little people? Is that sort of the global term? I'm a munchkin person. My wife and I were climbing some stairs up from the base of a waterfall. We're on vacation. And we're walking up going, oh, oh. Because every for older people walk up the stairs, or you gone down a whole long way. Right out of Wizard of Oz. Did I ask you, why is it Oz? Why do you call it the Wizard of whatever? Of Moof? Nobody would know any better. Wizard of Blood. Why Oz? You don't know. I will endeavor to tell you. He had a file cabinet with 2 drawers, A through N and O through Z. True story. I'm a Wizard of Oz fanatic. Why doesn't it? No one's looked surprised. You're all looking going, in that case. Thyroid hormone, active everywhere. Your cells all have receptors, just like they do for growth hormone, with very rare exceptions. They work in concert. Thyroid, as you will learn, sort of keeps things going at the right rate. Neither too slow or too fast. It's a lot of just right. Testosterone in males, estrogen in females certainly play a role, you might gather. They basically, it's spurts of those that cause growth plates to eventually close. Okay? And excess or deficits, anything really problematic. This is important. We won't get to all of the, I'll have to do it to start on Wednesday before fractures. About 5 to 10% of bone recycled every year. So compact bone, every 10 years, all of it. Spongy bone, every 3 to 4 years, all of it. So either deposit or resorption. At the endosteal, the internal surfaces, responding to stress and hormonal signals. What causes the resorption? The osteoclast. That C-L-A-S-T tells you, clasis. Clasis is like you destroy something, you crunch something. Okay? And so what they do is ruffle borders. They're a cluster of white blood cells, typically macrophages. They secrete a variety of very nasty enzymes. In the process of protons or an acidity, and they begin to gobble away at the bone itself. Okay, lysosomal enzymes and protons, digesting the matrix, okay, and by digesting the matrix, it releases the dissolved minerals, okay, transported by transcytosis, okay, and then that brings the calcium and the other mineral components into the bloodstream as their salts. And again, they can break apart dead osteocytes, osteoclasts, then undergo apoptosis when resorption is complete. And then we just make more. Remember, you go back to the previous illustration, ruffled borders, a lot of surface area. Again, it's about surface area. A lot of enzymes that are secreted. When we look for bone disorders, we look for because they're breaking. Remember the difference between kinases and phosphatases. So calcium phosphate, typically when you remove a phosphate, it's a phosphatase, right? So you're looking for acid and alkaline phosphatases in various areas. And you can fractionate them, finding out whether they come from bone, whether they come from somewhere else, okay, the liver. So it's a common enzyme to removing a phosphate. You want to see if it's from bone. And we have better ways to do it today, but back in the old days, we didn't have the luxury of scans or really sophistication of chemicals. So it's more, you had to work with what was there. I don't care about osteoid seams and calcification fronts. Okay. Again, the osteoid has these binding proteins. They bind the calcium ions. Okay. Studded with alkaline. Here's the alkaline phosphatase. Removes phosphate ions off the osteoid proteins, increasing local concentrations. They form crystals. Fancy name is hydroxyapatite. So I'm not really interested in all the sequence of events. The main player is calcium phosphate. By far and away, again, maybe some magnesium phosphate, maybe some calcium carbonate, and it calcifies the matrix. And again, 2 control loops. We're not going to get to those. We're going to look at calcium and it's negative feedback, but we're going to look at the way we bring calcium in. We revisit that in endocrine. We revisit that in kidney. Calcium is such a big player in physiology. Blood clotting, heart function, nerve function, muscle function, kidney function, just to name a handful. Vital to understand. And stressors, mechanical and gravitational forces remodeling. So we'll stop there with the calcium controls rather than race through it. Pick that up Wednesday. Focus on the anatomy and lab. Go from there. Thank you very much. Done with this room.